Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is John Hancock. I'm the president of the West Plains Water Coalition. It's a delight to be here in this lovely place on a beautiful spring evening to talk about the future of our community. West Plains Water Coalition began 2.5 years ago as an inquiry by my neighbors on Deep Creek at the top of this map in the West Plains about what's going on with PFAS at Fairchild. The issue began in 2017 with the discovery of these per and fluoroalkyl substances in the municipal water of Airway Heights. And it didn't take long to figure out that firefighting foam from Air Force Base was the contaminant in that water system. And it didn't take long to discover that it was a big plume of water contamination going north and east from the Air Force Base all the way to my neighborhood at the top of the map. The Air Force had given whole house filter systems to nearly 100 neighbors downstream from the Air Force, but the communications was not very clear about what the story was, what the science was, what the extent was, and what the Department of Defense was doing about it. So that was the beginning of our little nonprofit neighborhood organization called the West Plains Water Coalition. We were given a significant grant from state ecology to do what they call public participation about PFAS in our neighborhood. This meeting, all of our materials, our films are all funded with that government support from state ecology. We're grateful for that support. They think that public participation in contamination and waste treatment like this is a good expenditure of state money. We're grateful to have their support that makes these meetings possible. On this map, we see the outline of the hydrogeology of the West Plains aquifer. So guys like Dr. Pritchard have for a whole generation been studying the underground details of where the water comes from and where it goes. So we began with that hydrogeological definition of the West Plains aquifer, which doesn't correspond with any political boundaries. It's where the water comes from and where it goes, and that's more of the subject of Chad's talk tonight. The mission of the coalition is clean water for everyone on the West Plains. And it's a really complicated issue. And the educational content of the coalition's mission has 4 questions. What's PFAS all about? How does it affect me? That is me, the rural homeowner on the West Plains. What should I do about it? And number 4 then is, what will the government do? Those are the questions. That's our educational and advocacy mission. We're glad to be here at the Unitarian Church, which is actually on the edge of the West Plains aquifer. The water flows downhill from the airports towards us. But if you just think about water as a 2-dimensional map like this, you're missing the 3-dimensional actual groundwater behavior. And so imagine that it's 1,000 feet deep, and the river is sort of halfway down on the pancake. And the extent to which our aquifer, that is the West Plains aquifer, is connected with the Rathdrum Prairie aquifer, that is the aquifer that feeds the whole city of Spokane, is part of the next stage of investigation. So this big publication by the Aquifer Joint Board is sort of a project for us to now explain how the West Plains aquifer actually connects and fits and interacts with the aquifer that's famous. So our aquifer is not famous, it just exists. This one is, and it's a next chapter in the story. So the coalition's work is to find and share PFAS information, to simplify and summarize the details, to educate the community, and to push the agencies to work better together. There are big holes in the regulatory safety net into which PFAS falls, and specifically into which private well owners in the country don't get any regulatory support. We're out to fix that. We'd like to know a little bit more about you. If you've been to a PFAS meeting before, would you put your hand up? Excellent. So we've got some first timers here. At your house, do you drink city water? So that's about a third of people on city water. And if you drink country water, that's surely about everybody else. Okay, that's good to know too, because the issues are different. If you live outside the West Plains, that is outside this map, would you put your hand up, please? That's about a third. Thank you for coming. If you know a lot about PFAS, would you put your hand all the way up? If you know a little, put your hand halfway up. Okay, so we've got some people here who know part of this story, and we're glad for your questions and in response to the experts. The dangers of PFAS in consumer goods are another serious source of PFAS in our culture, but they're tiny. The PFAS in your makeup and your guitar strings and your ski wax is very small compared to 50 times worse in the drinking water in the West Plains. But general awareness of what PFAS is and what it does is, we think, a part of the important solution to getting community-wide engagement in the trouble. There are product restrictions underway, like in Washington, fast food containers can no longer contain PFAS. And there's also hope for new technology. In states like Michigan and Ohio, large-scale PFAS destruction technologies are now underway to destroy existing stockpiles of firefighting foam. In one recent example, a machine called the Annihilator can neutralize 500 gallons a day of highly concentrated liquid PFAS. Across the country and in Europe, inventors and engineers are competing for the huge money required to capture and destroy PFAS. Some eastern states have addressed PFAS 10 years ago. Let's catch up with them. Right here at the Unitarian Church of Spokane, there has been a very active, multi-generational approach towards cultural and environmental issues. In the early 80s, the minister of this church, who was a chemist named Bill Huff, founded the Hanford Education Action League. HEAL received national attention in 1986 when it successfully used the Freedom of Information Act to pry loose more than 19,000 pages of previously classified documents detailing airborne releases of radiation during 40 years of weapons production at Hanford. Those declassified records revealed extensive contamination of the Columbia River from plutonium-producing reactors' cooling water and liquid residues from chemical processing plant pipes piped directly into the ground. This church continues that tradition. Thank you, UUCS, for supporting our ideas tonight. And thanks also to the journalists who continue to aid the discovery of vital but troubling information. Our guest speakers tonight bring four distinct perspectives to this topic: science, government, law, and nature. I expect that each of you will latch on most easily to the one that fits your own viewpoint, but there are many strands, all interwoven. That's what the word ecology actually means. It's the admission that no single kind of information gives the complete picture of anything, and that many actions of different types must fit together holistically. We've saved time for questions. We'd like to ask that you hold your questions until the speakers are all finished. If you'd like to come to the microphone and ask a question, we invite you to do that. We've got traveling mics that will come around, or you can write a question on a blue card and hold it up, and we'll read the questions from here. So I'd like you now to meet Dr. Chad Pritchard.
How is everybody doing today? Okay, it's a serious topic. So yeah, we're doing a big project, and I have a slide all about that. I think I just saw John's title, and it's way better than my title. I just call it the Spokane River. So I'm just gonna go. And I've got some great students. Jerusha's over here. Hampson, we got some other students that were on that title slide too, so thanks for coming out. Eastern Washington University has been doing a lot of work in the West Plains for decades now. So what I'm going to talk about, I was told I have to have an outline slide, and so here's an outline slide, not by John, but by other people in the past. So what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Where are we doing it? And then a little bit about the aquifers that we're in the West Plains, and then just the results for the Spokane River is what I kind of focused on because I only have 10 minutes. And if you've ever taken a class from me, 10 minutes is not enough. There's a bunch of words. And some pictures of great students that have gone out too. So Department of Ecology has given us a wonderful, it was a $450,000 grant. It had to go through a municipality. And so City of Medical Lake, the wonderful Terry Cooper, Mayor Terry Cooper, took that grant. And they're keeping $50,000, so we have $400,000 to study this whole big area that I'll show you in a second. The main goal is to kind of get an idea of the 3D groundwater model. So like what John was saying with the pancakes, how is that syrup flowing between the different pancakes and how fast is it going to go? And then to calibrate that model, to make sure the model is really working, we're going to go out and what we did already, was sample 40 locations for a whole year to see how the PFAS changed seasonally. And we did that at surface bodies of water as well. And then last summer, we were able to add about 100 extra houses. So we just went out and did a one-time sampling for about 100 extra houses at about the same time that the EPA did the Spokane International Airport sampling. How many people were tested by EPA? I guess that's public, I don't know, sorry. Maybe that's private information, sorry. I was getting a sense as to what people were part of that. So we had with the Fairchild, well, actually they don't share anything with us, but they can't. That's not me complaining at all. So we have about 300 or 400 samples now, or 500 samples of the West Plain, which is great for our model. And then we're going to put that all together into a report that'll be due in June. And I'm kind of hoping maybe we'll get like a bigger hydrologic report done later by December for the next one. Okay. And then there's a graph. Jerusha made this. I love this graph. It's kind of probably small for a TV, but it makes me remember that PFAS is not just one chemical, or PFAS, whatever you want, potato, right? There's a lot of different variations on it. And the main ones that we're going to be looking at are PFAS, PFOA, PFHXS, and PFNA. And we'll also see quite a bit of PFBS in our area that's not quite associated with the Fairchild foam. But a lot of what I'm talking about with fate and transport and how we're getting water from the groundwater into the surface water has to do with how long and how that PFAS is made. So it's a man-made chemical where they took fluorine and shoved it with carbon to make it extremely water repellent and a very strong forever chemical material. And the length of that carbon chain kind of denotes how it's going to behave with water or in soil. And it actually turns out some of the longer chains towards the bottom of that graph in the green are going to be longer, and therefore they hold better in the soil. So they don't stay in water quite as much as you'd expect for like a contaminant like petroleum or something like that. So that'll come into play in our very last slide, that some longer chains generally will partition into clay, actually. There's quite a few papers on that. So where are we doing this study? We're talking about groundwater and surface water. On your guys' left, there should be a pretty rainbow kind of looking color. That's actually our groundwater model for the Grand Ronde basalt, the lowest basalt layer that we have in our area, with the groundwater generally flowing off to the northeast. And so if you have Fairchild Air Force Base and Spokane International Airport are kind of in the lower parts of that graph. And so if they're flowing out, they'd be flowing towards the Spokane River. Hence, this is in here for the Spokane River. On the right side, you'll see that same outline that we're kind of seeing behind us here, and what John showed before with the red outline for the West Plains, where we have Spokane River in the upper right-hand corner, and that comes down to Hangman Creek or Latah. I never know what I'm supposed to say. I just say them both. And then it comes down, wraps into Marshall Creek, and then that Marshall flows up into, and then there's a bunch of lakes. You got Fish Lake and Medical Lake, beautiful Medical Lake, and West Medical Lake, Silver Lake, all those. And then that boundary kind of curves back up north into Deep Creek. And then that Deep Creek goes all the way to the Spokane River. So that's our boundary. That's the hydrologic boundary. Right? So if water falls in that boundary, ideally it stays in that sort of area. Whereas the West Plains, metaphorically speaking or politically speaking, would include much wider areas because those boundaries don't really care about streams. Another cool thing about this graph is a paleo channel. That's kind of how we got into this whole project at the beginning. You guys can see those little contour lines that kind of go north-south through the West Plains right there. Those are old river valleys that the Missoula floods about 16,000 years ago scour it out really deep, and then fill it with sand and gravel. And so groundwater in those is gonna flow about 5 to 1,000 times faster than a regular aquifer. And so that's gonna be a big contaminant pathway. All right, I can already tell. And then those are sample locations. We'll talk to it. So here's that general idea that we have. There's the brown rock in the bottom right there. This is the basement rock. We think in the basement, it's probably just pretty much fractured rock. It's pretty local in the springtime. The groundwater is really shallow. By the summertime, if you don't have a deep enough well in the granites, a lot of times they'll actually be run dry for a lot of folks because it's not like a regional groundwater flow. And that's the southern boundary of our mapping area. And then off to your guys' right, you'll see there's 2 basalt flows. There's the lower basalt flow. It's called the Grand Ronde basalt. And then the Wanapum is the upper one. And there's a yellow layer between there. And that's the sediment called the Latah Formation. So most of everybody in this room, if you raised your hand for having your own well, it's probably down into the Grand Ronde basalt. It's the lower basalt. It's generally going to have more groundwater more regularly. And then that's kind of capped in a lot of places by this the yellow layer, the Latah. That's like, has anybody ever driven to Seattle before? Yeah, everybody has. At the Vantage, how many people have actually stopped at the Ginkgo Tree State Park? Oh, look at you guys. It took me like 15 years to actually stop it. I'm a geologist. But if you've seen that ginkgo trees right there, those are the trees that grew into the Vantage Formation. Between the big basalt flows, there was a hiatus where it rained a lot. It was pretty warm in the Miocene here. And so trees grew like ginkgo trees and oak trees, bunny rabbits probably, and there are a lot of fish. We actually have proof of fish, not the bunny rabbits. And then the basalt flow on top is the Wanapum flow. Those are about 16 million years old, and I'll show you about that. So our thought here is that we have precipitation. If it does infiltrate, which is probably not very likely because it's really hot where we are, it'll go into shallow groundwater and flow out away from that area. And the water that gets in the Grand Ronde generally will stay in the Grand Ronde for the most part. All right, so that's our cartoon. We have groundwater. We are in the Columbia Basin, and I like to mention this because you might have neighbors, or not neighbors, but friends or family that live in Quincy. We have a very different, we have the same rock type, so it's the same type of aquifer, but the groundwater flow is way different. And I don't have a laser pointer to really show you guys this, but where we are up in Spokane, if you know where Spokane is on that map, can you guys kind of tell Spokane River, and then you see the Columbia River kind of going up? We have these ridges, whatever. Groundwater flow in the Spokane area just goes to the north. Everywhere else in this Columbia Valley goes to the center part. Okay. And so that's because these old rocks that we have. So if you've driven to Cheney, you drive on 904 and you're going through the hills on the both sides of you. Medical Lake, if you ever hike around Medical Lake, there's the granite knob right there. West Medical Lake's got one as well. These are all pre-Mesozoic bedrock, so really, really old rock. And a lot of times it's granite, so it goes all the way down to the mantle. Kilometers, tens of kilometers down. We're just finishing up a project with uranium lead. It's in review right now at the GSA Bulletin Journal on actually age dating all these different buttes, which I'm kind of excited about. And one of those was Bonnie Lake. If you've ever been out to Bonnie Lake, just south of Cheney, you can canoe out through a wetland out into the coulee there, and there's this 1.5 billion year old island in the center. And you can see it right there. If you look really close, you can see some canoes and some Eastern students running around as well. So this is the basement rock that we have in our area, and we shot some lasers at the minerals to figure out how old they are. And that's going to be the basement, that brown rock, right? So that's the bathtub bottom of our hydrology here. And then most of us have our aquifers in the Columbia River basalt. And so here's a map where you can see Washington up there. Yeah, Washington. And then Oregon. Ooh. And then Idaho over to the other side there. And the gray is where the basalt erupted out about 16 million years ago. And when we're looking at our aquifers, it's usually in the bottom because we've all seen like basalt. You've all driven by it many, many times. The center is usually pretty dense. And so water is not going to be able to flow through that. Water has to have cracks or porosity to flow through. And so usually we'll see flows at the bottom or the top of these different lava flows. So our Grand Ronde flows right there, about 16.5 million years old, are by far the biggest aquifer that we have. And then on top of that, we have Missoula flood deposits, lots of sand and gravel quarries in our area. Pretty much no matter where you go in the West Plains, there is a gravel quarry or a sand quarry not that far from you. And that's all from about 16,000 years ago was the last big Missoula flood, 200,000, where the Missoula floods came through going at 60 miles an hour, 300 feet deep, scoured out the entire ground. And so there's a time model on your right side. I don't know why it's hard for me because it's on my right side too. Where there were some channels originally coming from these buttes. Missoula flood comes scouring through, etches through. So now these streams are not just shallow in just the Wanapum basalt, but now they go through that Latah Formation and all the way into the Grand Ronde as well. And that's going to be important because that's how groundwater can potentially get down into that Grand Ronde aquifer. These paleochannels are right between and right adjacent to our airports that have the AFFF. And so these are huge conduits for how groundwater flows in the West Plains. Man, this is just, it's got a mind of its own. I'm gonna let it go. So what we've done so far is we were able to take about 400 wells. This one has got some EPA data in as well, and we'll put it together to make a sort of an interpolation map. Now keep in mind, I showed you a map before that had all the points, and there were not that many points on that map. So what we do is kind of in between the two different points, we have to interpolate. So if we have 50 here and 70 here, then we go between them and it'd be like 60, right? And so that's what this map is. And what you'll kind of see, this is still that same West Plains. I keep preliminary on it because I still don't exactly know how it's all going to finish up here. But by June, you will all know if you're interested. And you see the red zones. Those are zones that have really, really high hazard index. And that's going to include both PFHXS and PFBS, two different types of PFAS that we find in high quantities in the West Plains. And what's interesting to see is that they'll follow those paleo channels, these old channels, and especially as it goes up to 7 Mile at the very tip of that triangle at the top of our area there, that's going to be 7 Mile, where there's a lot of fine sands and clay deposits in really deep area. It's like the ORV park. Has anybody ever driven over that? It's where Deep Creek should kind of flow, but instead we drive four-wheelers on top of it. The sand, and it's super fine because the glacial Lake Columbia was there, just depositing water out of a river. So we already have a pretty good sense as to where PFAS is geographically. Oh man, this is just jumpy. Good luck. Good luck. So here's some of the results that we have that include the surface water itself right here. So this is in the Hangman or the Latah watershed. If you look at your right-hand corner, you'll see a graph that's got no blue on it. I know you can't see the numbers, and it doesn't really matter. I guarantee you it doesn't matter at all. If you can see color, that means that you see a version of PFAS. So if we went down to Qualchin, we don't have any PFAS in the Hangman or the Latah Creek. What happens is you start to flow north towards the Spokane River. We have Garden Springs and Mystic Canyon or Mystic Falls in the Garden, it's called Indian Canyon, I guess. Those two creeks, as you can see, the arrow is kind of pointing towards the little blue lines right there, have quite a bit of color in them. So those have fairly high. Mystic Falls is about 70 to 80 parts per trillion. For PFAS, especially PFHXS and PFAS, the two that are very associated with AFFF. And then on there, I also added the March 2024 results from Spokane International Airport, where you can see that the PFAS exceeds 100 parts per trillion. The drinking water standard, again, is 4 parts per trillion. So we can see that the groundwater is definitely interacting a bit with the surface water, especially from springs. What we don't quite understand is these springs come down and they go to the creeks and the rivers. And everybody's walked into a creek or a spring, right? Or a creek or a river. And when you're walking, what comes up through your toes? It's like mud, right? So when you get to these bigger rivers, they've got mud and terraces around there. So I think when the springs are coming in, a lot of that sediment's actually the PFAS is getting trapped in the fine grained sediments before it gets in the river. Alternatively, or at the same time, there's a whole bunch of water coming from upstream that doesn't have PFAS, and so it dilutes these results. And so we do see that Latah Creek, at least a couple times throughout the year, does have PFAS, and then that's right before it goes into the Spokane River. And then there are some wonderful students, like one's Jerusha, getting interviewed by KXLY. That was a fun day. And then here's our Spokane River data. I'm sure I'll probably talk for 10 minutes by now. Again, so this is north is up, south is down. And so if you go to the bottom there, you can actually see some of the points from Mystic Falls and Indian Canyon in the south part there. But at the very southern part, like over by TJ Minnock Bridge, not that far from here, as a matter of fact, we pretty much always had non-detect values. We went out and sampled 4 or 5 times, always non-detect. As we go up the stream, we can pick up a little bit of PFAS here and there, but again, it's super low, and it's actually below what I'm supposed to report. I put a little color on there, but I know you can't see the numbers, so I feel safe that I reported it, but not really. Okay, but it's there. It's a weird lab thing. Okay, but then you'll notice by the end, by the time we get up through, Bowl and Pitcher, and then Please Flats, once we finally get up to 9 Mile, we'll start picking up some PFAS, and that's in detectable levels. And we think that that's probably because that's going to be downstream of where the paleo channels come out and potentially put PFAS into the Spokane River at low amounts, and we don't always find it. If the flow is very high, our last spring flow was 10,000 CFS. I should have put that graph on there too, which is a lot of water for the Spokane River, and those detects, they were all non-detect. There was no PFAS that we measured. I'm not sure other people will talk about other stuff, but yeah, so that's the Spokane River. Isn't that exciting? Good. Okay. I think so. I like the fact when we have non-detects, it makes me very happy because the groundwater did not always have non-detects. We actually had quite a few detects in the groundwater. And that'll be another talk in June, I think, with the West Plains Water Coalition. And so thank you. My contact information is there. I always like to chat about groundwater hydrology, rocks, and I mean, it's a sad topic, but PFAS it's fascinating. I mean, it's from a geologic point. So that's it for me. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. I'm the water protector of Spokane River Keeper. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and restore the Spokane River for future generations. And we're a member of the Water Keeper Alliance, which means we're part of a group of about 400 water keepers globally who protect about 4 million miles of waterway globally. I'm going to share a little bit about regulation and how we regulate PFAS and also what we have seen as water keepers along the Spokane River. The trick is the button. So there are two real main systems that are used to regulate PFAS. And my realm is mostly in the Clean Water Act, but most of you are probably more familiar with the Safe Drinking Water Act because that's what regulates what comes through our city water systems, our public water systems. Marlene will probably have a lot more to say about drinking water stuff than I have to say. As a riverkeeper, we've mostly focused in the Clean Water Act section and and the Clean Water Act regulates rivers, lakes, wetlands, really just surface water. That is enforced by the EPA and in our state also by ecology through a permitting system. Those permits kind of define the rules for what dischargers are allowed to put in the river and basically what their limits are for pollution. You'll see at the very bottom that maybe you can't see it. The limit for drinking water is substantially more protective than our limit for surface water. Surface water limit is, I think you can't see it there, but we have one for PFAS, the one with an O, and it is 8.4 parts per billion. That is about 2,000 times less protective than our drinking water standard. Now, there's a lot of different reasons why that's important, but the biggest one, we're going back underground. It's the aquifer. The Spokane River is directly connected to that famous aquifer, the Spokane Valley Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer. This aquifer, is at some points above our river, and it feeds water right into the river. At other parts, our river dumps water into the aquifer. So this really isn't an abstract concept here. What affects our river is potentially going to affect our drinking water as well. So why is that important? Well, here at the Waterkeeper Alliance, we did a study with the Waterkeeper Alliance, Spokane River Keeper. We did a study in 2022 on the river looking at PFAS. These samples were taken in June, so they were at the tail end of those high flows that Chad was just talking about. And we were looking for sources and what sources were potentially putting PFAS into surface waters across the U.S. There were 114 different waterways tested across 34 different states and in D.C. For 55 different compounds. And of those, 83% of the sites had detectable PFAS levels. Most of the levels that were found were above the interim health advisory from the EPA. And you'll see one thing that John had mentioned is that the Southeast is really far ahead of us. And this map kind of shows you a little bit why. It goes back to that tech issue, right? Our study here had a sampling detection limit of 1 part per trillion. So anything below 1 part per trillion wasn't going to show up on these studies. So there might have been some of those non-detects that actually had PFAS, but it was below that detectable limit. And you can see our little dot. You might not even be able to see it. I swear it's there, though. There is a little red dot. There's also a little blue dot kind of under it. But this kind of explains why the Southeast is so far ahead, right? They've been able to detect the PFAS in their water for a significant more amount of time, which means they've been able to address the sources a lot faster. They know where it's coming from. They know that it's there a lot sooner than we know here. So here, what we found, we were looking specifically at the wastewater treatment plant. Sorry, Marlene. We had a sampling site above the wastewater outflow and then below. And we found that there was detectable PFAS changes above and below the wastewater treatment plant. There was no PFAS detected, again, in that above 1 part per trillion, above the treatment plant. But we did find PFOA and PFXA at 1.7 parts per trillion below the outfall. So this tells us that the treatment plant is also a likely source, but it's really not the full picture. This is one source. There are lots of other potential sources in our river, and they're all regulated. Not all of them. The one that's not is these paleo channels, which is a challenge. But the other sources are all regulated. We have industry standards that we can enact for all these outfalls that are coming into the river, and they would all protect it. So what's next? Last year, we again looked at PFAS in the river. We used what's called this PFASive monitoring. So instead of a point-in-time measurement, we actually left these monitors in the river for, I think it was a week, and they come to equilibrium, and then I'm not a scientist, I'm an attorney. They do stuff underwater, and then they tell us what it is at a higher rate of accuracy. I don't know. The report will have more details if you're actually interested in the science. But we looked at the wastewater treatment plants and edge of field where they're using biosolids from on land application. We don't have those results yet, but we're really expecting to see some results from both, probably pollution from both of those sources. So really, we know that PFAS isn't an invisible problem on our river. It's here, and we have the scientific and the regulatory tools to take care of it. We know how to handle this now. So what are we doing about it? What do we do now that we know that it's in our river? So moving forward at the Riverkeeper, we are looking at really 3 big things. Stronger water quality criteria and discharge limits. We know that stronger point source regulation means that we'll have a cleaner river. We know that without strict limits, industries and municipalities will have little incentive to reduce their discharge. We know that this criteria will lead to cleaner water. By tightening controls over these sources, we can significantly reduce the amount of PFAS entering the river, and we can have an immediate impact on the health of our waterway and prevent pollution before it spreads further. The second thing we think is really important is enhanced monitoring and actually studying where the PFAS is in our river. Chad's study is a great start at this, and it looks at one significant source, but we need to know more. We need to actually trace and identify these specific sources, not just these paleo channels and the treatment plants, but also looking at industrial discharges and landfills and stormwater and some of that product use. Without this, we're not really treating all of the symptoms. We're not really treating everything. We're just putting a Band-Aid on it. So we really need to increase where our understanding of what the current levels are in the river and where it's coming from. Increased monitoring would also help provide more data about what the PFAS levels in our river are like and what kind of new sources are out there. If we know where it's being released and in what quantities, we can enforce these laws more effectively. And the last thing that I just want to touch on is that we need an increased investigation into fish consumption. We know from recent fish sampling studies that the fish are contaminated with PFAS, and there are people that rely on those fish to eat, but nobody has studied game fish. They're only looking at suckers right now, which if you heard what Chad said about the dirt, large suckers tend to play in that clay. Our trout don't necessarily do that as much. So really we need to understand what are people actually eating out of our river in terms of PFAS, because a contaminated fish can be, one contaminated fish is like eating one fish is the same as drinking contaminated water for a month. So it's really important that we understand that fish consumption and that fish tissue is studied so that we can protect human health and recreational users. And really the bottom line here is that regulation can work if we just use it. The Clean Water Act gives us these tools through permits. It gives us the systems to put limits on these dischargers and to really limit what's coming into our system. Without updated regulations, these PFAS will continue to flow from these sources unchecked. Really, we just want to see that we have a clean river for our future and for future generations. And we're not going to get that if we're not stopping it at the source. So, yeah. Thanks for letting me share with you.
I'm Marlene Feist. I'm the city's public works director. So that's water, sewer, garbage, and streets. We operate at the city of Spokane the largest drinking water system in the region. And we can deliver up to 150 million gallons of water in a day. So water quality is really important to us. We do have a robust water quality monitoring program. We run thousands of tests for a variety of contaminants every year. Lots of tests for things like, as you would expect, E. coli, right? So we're looking for bacteria, we're looking for chemicals, we're looking for arsenic, all kinds of things that are regulated by the state and the federal government. In 2024, as in previous years, we've met all of our federal and state water quality standards, but that doesn't mean that we're not concerned about what we're seeing. In 2023, we added new testing for PFAS contaminants under the state of Washington, and we'll go into that a little bit. In 2024, also the EPA adopted new requirements for PFAS, as both Caitlin and Chad have mentioned. So I am not the scientist either. I think Chad gave a much better overview of what PFAS is than I would. But these have been around since the 1930s. And what my water people will tell you is that the fluorine, chlorine, or carbon bond is one of the strongest bonds, which is where you get this sort of forever chemical. What I can tell you from my work at the city is anytime somebody tells you a chemical is forever, that's probably one we shouldn't go with, right? Because they don't break down in the environment. We've seen that with PCBs, and we're seeing that now with PFAS. So in the 1950s, PFAS began to appear in consumer products. There are now more than 11,000 compounds, right? So the chemistry, as was probably way more eloquently stated by Chad, contributes to their non-stick and friction reducing properties, right? So they're going to repel water, resist stains, grease, and smother fire. And firefighting foam is what we all know about, but it's in ski wax. It's in your Teflon pans. It's in flame-resistant clothing. So those flame-resistant pajamas I probably put my kids in when they were little probably had PFAS in them. They were starting to see some things happen where they're going to stop production of some of the major PFAS contaminants, but it goes on, right? So in the 90s, you're seeing the first detections in surface water, particularly around manufacturing locations. If any of you have watched Black Water movie with Mark Ruffalo, it's pretty interesting to learn what that lawyer had to do around this issue. In 2013, the EPA added it to the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. So basically, they tell water systems, hey, we haven't regulated this compound yet, but we want you to test for it. And not every water system is selected to test for it, not every year, but that's how they start to develop rules for new contaminants. In 2017 has been mentioned, Fairchild released testing results, and that's when the city of Airway Heights was dramatically impacted. And we'll talk a little bit about what the city did at that point. In 2023, the state adopted new rules for monitoring 5 PFAS compounds with specific state action levels. And that was followed up a little over a year later when the EPA announced rules for 6 compounds that were effective now in 2027. That's where you get the 4 parts per trillion rule. So the drinking water source that the city's water system uses is the Spokane Valley Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer. Obviously, I think this room is pretty familiar with this huge aquifer that stretches all the way to the big lakes, Coeur d'Alene and Pend Oreille, two states, an amazing underground resource that we need to protect. It's fortunately very clean, and we want to keep it that way. So we have 8 wells. I missed one. There it is. City has 8 wells, primarily in the east part of the city. Our newest well is Havana, which was added in 2024. The rest of them have been around in our system for quite a while. Most of our wells have multiple wells, or really well sites with multiple holes in the ground. Most of our wells, amazingly, were hand dug. So they are not super deep. They go to, when you're hand digging something, you go till you find water and then you stop. So one of the things we're looking at is being able to go deeper with our wells to have more resiliency for the future. But and not all of these wells are used year round. So obviously we have huge summer peaks in our water usage. So we are using only a few wells this time of year. We'll start to see that pick up as the weather warms up. So in 2015, we were asked under that new rule for EPA to do some testing. So we tested 5 wells for PFAS. We used a test method that was not as sensitive as what's available today. It tested with limits of 10 to 90 parts per trillion, and we had all non-detects under that test method. In 2023, we tested 7 wells under the new state rule and found low-level detections at Grace and Ray Street. And that test is sensitive down to 2 parts per trillion. In 2024, we tested 6 wells for 29 PFAS compounds and had detections at Ray Street and our new Havana well. And in 2025, we are sampling Ray Street, Grace, Havana, and Well Electric every quarter to see. So quarterly is important because it plays into how the EPA compliance works. But so we're going to do that. We also did additional testing in here. Part of this testing was for a lawsuit that we've joined, which I will tell you about. You will not be able to read this, but it basically just shows the quarterly samples. And it's the EPA's rule is based on a running annual average of 4 consecutive quarters. So the quarters is important. So we have to test every quarter and see where we fall in. If we have detects, what those detects are, and then those are averaged out. And that's how the EPA's rule works. I want to put a little bit about our levels in perspective. We've had hits around 2 and 4 parts per trillion at a couple of those wells. These are low. By comparison, Airway Heights had test results as high as 1,500 and 1,700 parts per trillion. And Fairchild Air Force Base had tests results that were magnitudes higher than that. So there are 2 different issues that we're dealing with, I think, as Caitlin pointed out, right? So you have sort of the paleo channel, really high level, and then you have these low levels, and you're trying to also find out sources for those, which is a little bit of a different investigative method, right? To get to those low levels. Are they background? Where are you seeing them? Other water systems in our area are getting some of those low level detections. So far, we haven't found a specific pattern related to those. So it's important for us to test on a regular basis so that we can start to see trends, which we haven't had enough data really to get a good idea for those low levels. So what else? The city has a long-term expanded water supply agreement with Airway Heights. So in 2017, when we found out that Airway Heights' municipal water supply was testing at such high levels for PFAS, the city immediately, we had a connection with Airway Heights for supplemental water in the summer. So their wells produced so much water and they needed to buy water from the city in the summertime to meet their demand. We added a second connection immediately. We helped them flush their system to get rid of the water that was in the system, and then added an above ground connection within days at the Northern Quest Casino area. So basically at Hayford there at the casino, we added an above ground connection to complement the one that we have that was a permanent connection at Hayford and US 2. Since that time, we have created a second permanent connection and removed the above ground one. And we did that at Craig Road. So now the city's water feeds Airway Heights from Craig Road and from US 2 and provides the vast majority of their water, if not all of their water. You have to ask them specifically where they're getting, if they're getting any other water supply. But we have a long-term agreement with them. They were able to secure funding, about $15 million worth of funding from the state. And they're investing that money into the city of Spokane's water system so that we can deliver more water to them over time. So we are working on upgrades to our system to allow us to meet the amounts of flow that we have agreed to with Airway Heights. We also directly serve many properties in the West Plains. So Airway Heights has some. We also are serving lots of properties directly. And we're evaluating what else we can do. We're looking at properties right now that are adjacent to existing distribution mains to see if we can hook them up and whether there are grant opportunities for us to get more people who are within reasonable distances hooked up to city water. And the city also has, as part of a multi-jurisdictional lawsuit against PFAS manufacturers, multi-district litigation, I guess is what we call it. So, so far, we have joined efforts against 3M, DuPont, Tyco, and BASF. And it's very similar to litigation we have been involved in against Monsanto over PCBs. And funding would be used to address contamination in our system. What else do I have? So tonight, City Council actually voted to allow our citizens to determine whether we will join the county's aquifer protection area. The current authorization for the county's aquifer protection area expires at the end of 2025. It's been around for 40 years. The city was part of the aquifer protection area for the first 20 years it was around. We opted out for the second 20 years, and now council approved a resolution authorizing the county to include the city's voters in the request this summer. So the county's looking to put that on the ballot in August. And so what's new is that the council did vote today on their resolution. So voters in the city, once the county finishes that work, will be able to vote on whether to include it. It's a $15 per year fee, and you pay for it through your property tax. It's not a tax, it's a fee, but the billing happens through your property tax bill. Potential uses for us at the city for APA funding would be investing in infrastructure that addresses pollutants of concerns like PFAS, controlling stormwater in both our separated and combined sewer systems, delivering projects that would mitigate impacts of climate change on the aquifer, also public education efforts relating to understanding the aquifer, and also best management practices of activities that shouldn't happen over the aquifer. The county has a really good education system that they have a great facility at their treatment plant. They also have a second education site at Saltese Flats. So those kinds of education efforts are in part funded through the county's APA today and would continue to be. So the APA would raise about $1.8 million for the city. What's next? We're going to be obviously doing a lot more testing and monitoring, understanding how what we need to do to maintain compliance with regulation. Invest in technologies and approaches to address concerns, and we are supporting the Spokane Aquifer Joint Board in investigating potential sources and reviewing the results of other water purveyors. The more test spots you have, the better you're going to know the system. And obviously, we're continuing to work on plans to support Airway Heights and monitoring concerns at the airport and the West Plains. So I think that's it, John, for me.
If you don't know me already, my name's Amy Midstock, and I write for the Spokesman Review. I'm a columnist. I talk a lot about the outdoors, garden vermin, unethical ways to get rid of them, and how much I like clean water. The picture that was up there earlier was me backpacking with my PFAS-free water filter system in the Selkirks. And I don't always filter my water back there, but I have caught a few critters before. One time I was I'm going to talk too long. You gave me the microphone. One time I was in southern Idaho mountain biking, and I ran out of water, and I was with a group of people, and they said, "Oh, we have water." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Look at this great creek we're at. I'll just drink from that." And so I filled up my water bottle and chugged it, and then I rode about 20 feet up a hill, and there was like swamp bilge feeding the creek. And I was like, "Wow, that's going to be some antibiotics." I wrote this story inspired by John and what's happened in the West Plains and what's happening actually all over the globe to our water systems. It's called The Apology of Water. The water cannot speak for itself. I believe if it could, it would apologize. I'm sorry, it would say. I am only doing what water does. Traveling, that is, between sky and soil, over oceans and fields, bumping lazily into mountains, trickling down streams, exploding into waterfalls. It spreads into lakes and seas, seeps beneath the rock and soil to form mysterious underground waterways, and carries with it always the mineral memories of where it has been. I imagine those memories came on spring rivers that rushed crystalline with the stories of alpine winters, aquifers that boasted about wildfire blazes from seasons past, myths of Ice Age flora and fauna melting their way back to the oceans. There was a time when the only pollution we added to those traveling stories was biological. Cholera, dysentery, polio. The water would have worried for our sake. You're living too close together, it might have warned us. Then it diluted our diseases with rains, rinsing us of everything but our ignorance, and doing just what water does, traveling, and passively carrying the stories. Water doesn't ask questions or argue, and as Lao Tzu said, it is yielding. Our waters have yielded to farmers who wanted square fields, to developers who wanted solid foundations, to factories who wanted disposal. Still, poke a hole in your yard, and it rushes forth without complaint to water your garden, sustain your family, and make ice cubes for your cocktails. When the water of Spokane's West Plains was heavily polluted by the use of fire retardant at the Air Force Base, the evidence of the dangers of PFAS was already mounting. Nearly 80,000 gallons of material containing high amounts of the stuff seeped into the West Plains groundwater, and then the water merely did as water does. Our short-sightedness about harmful substances can be baffling, as though we imagine they have somewhere else to go once used, as if the soil, water, and air themselves are renewable resources. What exactly do we plan to do when the planet is used up? PFAS are known for their enduring nature. They don't break down easily and are found in many of our everyday items, the non-stick pans, outdoor gear, mascara, dental floss, and now, our contaminated water. When we consume or absorb them, they build up in our bodies. The water passes through us, abandoning its chemical passengers and leaving an imagined apology. Meanwhile, we function as biological filters like swollen and discarded Brita cartridges. Those residents whose homes, yards, gardens, farms source their water from the wells in the West Plains, they have dangerously high levels of PFAS in their bodies. In the vague world of correlation that precedes evidence of causation, of scientists working to prove the latter, PFAS are already known to be directly linked to kidney and testicular cancers, fertility and prenatal disorders, fetal development, thyroid and liver disease, increased cholesterol. The list of correlating conditions is far longer and growing. It is a well-established, though arguably insane reality, that in order for anything to have a measure of importance or autonomy, for it to have rights or protections, it must have personhood. For rivers to have freedom or hold polluters accountable, for forests to remain autonomous in their complex ecologies, for aquifers to remain pure and plentiful, we humans must anthropomorphize them into significance. Until then, we'll use them up and render them impotent. When a court is necessary to determine the validity of a river's claim to cleanliness, I am convinced the arrogance and foolishness of the human race knows no limits. For the humans who have fallen ill or are at significant risk for doing so, they must follow the water to its source in search of answers and justice in forms that cannot compensate for the loss of health. No one knows the exchange rate of dollars to vitality. All of this is necessitated by a world in which attaching accountability is like trying to grab a handful of smoke to throw at someone. And now it's almost too late for accountability, for we must make nice to find solutions. In West Plains, that means focusing on resolving the problem and addressing the present danger, educating the public, testing wells, filtering water, mitigating excessive exposure. The question of who should pay is less acute because every day of accumulating PFAS is dangerous and currently irreversible. Waiting for someone to foot the bill is not an option. Like the suffering contained in Pandora's box, these materials cannot be coaxed or cajoled back in. Our rain jackets, our floss teeth, our takeout containers all belie a dependency on these chemicals in the name of convenience or technology or health. Although I'm certain that Teflon never made an egg taste better or stick less than a hot butter slab on a cast iron skillet. Just saying. There is propensity to limit our concern to the thousands of thirsty residents who would like to drink a safe glass of water or eat a carrot that doesn't remind them of Chernobyl. These are things we take for granted until our own lakes are toxic, until our own fish are dead, our own wells and gardens poisoned. We could wait to take action until we feel directly impacted, for that is inevitable. The water will flow downstream and contaminate the rivers and lakes and seas. Companies will continue to produce and disperse harmful products, and we'll be too busy trying to pay off medical bills or surviving chemo to join the movement for change. But we're not powerless yet. We are the demand that drives the economy. We can ask for products free of PFAS and other harmful substances. And yeah, this can sometimes turn into a really long conversation when you're just trying to buy a new pair of boots. We can support companies committed to using safer products, and we can help educate our neighbors and friends and collaborate in community activism like everyone here tonight is doing to raise our collective voice. What we cannot do is nothing. What we cannot do is continue absorbing these chemicals without consequence. We cannot allow our bodies to be the next innocent carriers of toxic waste. For in our deaths, we will be the contaminant. And when we return to the soil, the water will do as water does.
We welcome your questions. We'd like to get them all on the microphone, so if you wouldn't mind to second up here, or put your hand up. Tim and Monica are strolling with the microphone, and we'd just like to hear with Kevin.
Thank you so much for all of the great presentations. I have a question for Marlene. I'm wondering how we might be able to work with the city of Spokane in order to get our residents hooked up to city water supply. We're about 2 miles from the northern quest to the east and a little bit north. Thank you.
So, it's going to be, we have somewhat limited of a geographic area around the existing pipes that will be easy for us to connect. When you're talking about 10-acre lots with significant distance, a municipal water system doesn't work very well because you can't maintain potability for if there's not enough water use in a pipe. For example, we had a large pipe out Craig Road that we ultimately connected to for Airway Heights in that second connection. But for a long time, we hadn't used it because there wasn't going to be enough use on that water. So it depends really on how close to the existing system you are and how close the houses are or the users of the water are to whether we can extend the municipal system that way. So that's something that we're starting to look at now to see what are the most obvious places to connect. Also, there could be potentially places where the Airway Heights system goes much farther than my system, which could be a potential place to hook up. So it's all this kind of connections that we'll have to be looking at. I know that was sort of the bureaucratic answer, but I don't really know yet what possibilities there are and which ones. The ones that are closer in and in the city that were, historically on wells probably have a higher chance of somebody who's 2 miles away from an existing water main.
We have another question here from Christine, but before she asks, I just want to let everyone in the room know that a pair of car keys were found at the back table. They have a Chevrolet. Oh, okay. All right.
I have two questions. One is just what are some things that we might be able to do at home to help with this? And the other is I'm a teacher and I'm wondering if I can make any connections. I work with kindergarten, but we're like a K through 12 school. So I know we do a lot of service learning, like it's required in our school. And it would be kind of nice to be able to not only educate our kids about this, but also opportunities to help and give back to our community. So it's just like a two-part. And it's to everybody, whoever might have something.
The coalition is on the way towards making lesson plans. So we'd love to be in touch with you. It's one of the things we can say on this blue card. It's 2 parts. Tell us a little bit about yourself and story. If you have a question, put your hand up to the blue card.
So, Caitlin, you'd mentioned testing for PFAS concentrations below and above the Spokane Regional Wastewater Facility, Reclamation Facility. And I was curious why you didn't test the actual effluent coming out of the facility. And as a part B for Marlene, is the city working with the regional facility to test PFAS, the inlet, the outlet, biosolids, those locations? And is anybody testing the CSO facilities or any of the stormwater facilities?
We didn't test the outfall because our study was looking specifically at the surface water limit and the surface water levels. We wanted to know whether there was any, first of all, upstream or downstream. But it was also not our study. The Waterkeeper Alliance designed it, and they specifically were looking at the surface waters, not the outfall. And I think Marlene does do some testing. So
yeah, we're starting to get some testing. I don't know that I have any results today yet from that. But so there's a lot of interest in testing in biosolids as well as and I'm not sure if we're just starting on the wastewater side. Obviously the drinking water side is ahead of the wastewater side. So, but we will start that work, I imagine, here pretty quickly. I know that biosolids was the first thing that ecology has asked us to look at. So we have submitted samples, but we haven't gotten results back from them. They're sort of managing that initial investigation there. CSO system would be the same thing. I don't have any results there yet. What I can tell you is that we have some of the most advanced treatment in the nation at our treatment plant. We have tertiary membrane treatment, and most of the chemicals like this ride on the sediments. And so that is actually pretty helpful because we're able to get down to very, very small particles at our system. So whatever we capture in the CSO system goes to the treatment plant, which is actually beneficial for the river.
Probably could add, we actually have sampled throughout a whole wastewater treatment plant. And if you don't have membrane, you don't see a change at all. It stays pretty much the same. We can't sample the in material just because the values are probably too high. You have to filter it so much. And it's also not as pleasant to sample. But then the membrane, yeah, what Marlene just said, the membrane is actually like an RO system essentially, which is what we would use in the house to take you guys out. So what I've sampled from the Spokane River is actually pretty good for
When did your tertiary come online?
Well, 2021, the tertiary came online, and then we had to work out. We optimized it over about 6 or 8 months after that. So it's been running, pretty much very consistently for about 2 years after optimization. So we are. That system is pretty amazing. So yeah.
I'm sorry, we didn't answer the question about what from the woman who said, "What should I do at my house?" Test your private well for PFAS right away. That's the starting point. But if you're drinking city water, Marlene's company tests that water. So don't worry about city water with PFAS if you're buying it from the city. You're taken care of. That's the Federal Clean Drinking Water Act that funds the inspection, funds parts of the solutions, and makes sure to certify your safe water in the city. If you're in the country, in the hot spots in the neighborhood, though, get a test. If you have PFAS in your water, stop drinking it tomorrow. For $100, you can get a Brita pitcher and a special PFAS filter for your counter. All your drinking water needs to go through some sort of a filter. Don't use your body as a filter. The government may eventually come to the solution and provide filters for everyone with polluted wells, but don't wait around. It's expensive to be sick. Costs $100 to get started with a filter, and you can size up from there for your chickens, for your carrots, for your orchard, for your cattle if you choose. But one of the things the coalition provides at westplainswater.org is a whole raft of educational materials about testing, about filters, about health, about agriculture. The materials in print on the back table will give you a sample. Take home some literature about it and see us on the web at westplainswater.org for more information. Craig.
So again, I'll add my thanks for all of you being here and for your help for us in understanding this vast and very complicated problem that we're all grappling with. So my first question would be to Ms. Feist. You mentioned that you, at the city, have some kind of monitoring of what's going on at the airport. I forget the exact term you said, but you're watching the airport and its involvement and its response to their PFAS problem. Could you elaborate on what that monitoring is? Do you have an exact or somewhat of a relationship or some role in Department of Ecology's investigation out there, and is it ongoing, or what is the nature of this monitoring at this stage, and what do you anticipate it might become?
So the Spokane International Airport is actually owned by the city and the county. So obviously we're very concerned with, so the airport operates relatively independently, but the underlying ownership is with the city and the county. So we are watching their compliance with the testing and the other requirements that ecology has laid out, because it's important to us that they respond appropriately. So currently, as the public works director, I don't have a direct control over what's happening there, but it's certainly something as a city that we're interested in learning more about the investigation and the work that is happening there under those responses to the ecology requests. So
that's encouraging. Thank you. Can I ask too while I'm standing here, and then? Okay. So, Dr. Pritchard, could you enlighten us at all? Are there any other sources of PFAS that might be surprising us at all, or do you think most of what you are going to end up seeing comes from the airport? And in specific, we still have some lingering questions about training and storage at the various fire stations on the West Plains. And we have the same kind of question about the missile sites, because they use solid fuels, but what did they train for solid fuel fires with out at the missile sites?
Those are all wonderful statements, Craig, and thank you for coming out too. Everybody for coming out. This is great. So there is a lot in there, and we are going to have a final report. So the missile silos potentially had jet fuel because they had nuclear bombs in the ground, and fires happen. And there is one location where we can sort of see a signature that would have PFHXS in it. So PFAS and PFHXS are very much tied to AFFF for the firefighting foam. However, all of those sites, just like Fairchild Air Force Base, get their water from other locations. So there's not actually a monitoring well on a lot of those locations for PFAS. I've seen one report for the Four Lakes site that they talked about a fluoral alkaline substance, but it wasn't like listed as PFAS at that point in time. If there was there, it seemed like it was fairly low. However, TCE and benzene, other things like that, trichloroethylene, has been known to be dumped down drinking water wells into the aquifer from those sites. Other sites that we found 5 potential factors or sources. The Fairchild or the AFFF is definitely a couple of those with the PFAS and PFHXS. We've got short chain carbolic and sulfonic acid. So one of those are going to be probably from people. We digest this. I had my blood tested. I wouldn't drink it if I was a vampire. And so our bodies are filters, unfortunately, to some extent. So our septic systems do put out PFAS back in the groundwater. Another reason we try not to use RO filters because when you backflow those to clean them out, they just puts the water right back in the groundwater in your septic system. And another big one that we found, wells that are near boiled roads tend to have high PFBS, which is a shorter chain PFAS. And we think that's going to be in oils. So automotive oils or even like what they apply on roads. That's the preliminary, what we got so far. The PFAS, you look at the airports, that they just have very high levels. And it sort of dominates the data, those data.
Marcy.
Hi, I have a question for Chad. Given the results of the wells that have been tested just on Garfield Road, what's your thought about moratorium on putting new wells in? We have a new place going in, and I worry that they're going to punch a well in there. And is there a moratorium? What do you think?
As a tenured professor, I could tell you my opinions. I would love to see a lot of less development in a lot of places. That's water resources for Department of Ecology or Department of Health. When you go to actually get the permit itself, they should be telling you by now, I would think, in those areas. There are zones of Garfield Road that are actually, Deep Creek's a little different. It's like the gaining and losing streams that were mentioned earlier for the Spokane River. There's parts that are pretty high, and then when you get down farther, there's parts that are low, and then there's a small little zone that's pretty high from the upper Grand Ron Aquifer. I'm going off too far already. Filter is probably the best thing, I would say. But yeah, no, I think if there's something that I'm sorry, I'm not looking over there. Department of Health and Department of Ecology should have something, and that's something that like the West Place Water Coalition is definitely putting more emphasis on, is to let people know before they drill a well that they're in a zone that's contaminated, and hopefully our report will help with that.
I hope so. Thanks.
But my personal opinion is yes, stop developing. It's a beautiful country.
Question in the back.
Yeah, two questions. One, for anybody on the panel, there was some discussion about the Spokane River dumping water into the aquifer at some point. Has there been any studies or any cooperation with agencies in Idaho to discover if there's been contamination in their portion of the aquifer or if it's migrated there? The other question specifically for Marlene Feist, you'd mentioned that the city of Spokane has test wells around the city, and the locations where they were discovered, if I saw the map correctly, understood they were near the South Hill. There are still wells there and very close to there, presumably pulling from the same water source. Has the city taken any action to notify the private well owners in that area around those city wells of the detections of the PFAS that were discovered recently?
So we actually are required to report all of our testing results for all the contaminants. We have a technical water quality report that's available for primarily people who have various, sensitivities and stuff. Look at the technical report, or if you're a business like your Hollister Steer and you're making injectable medications, you're looking at our technical one. We also have a consumer confidence report that goes out. It's also available on our website. Our wells are well within the city, and all of the residents in the city of Spokane are served by city water. We have not specifically reached out to well owners outside the city limits who might have exempt wells with that information, but our information is available, readily available to the public online.
And to answer your other question, she mentioned it in her presentation. The Aquifer Joint Board is a joint board between the water purveyors in Washington and Idaho, and they're looking at the source tracking as part of their next research phase.
Mm-hmm. And we're also part of the Idaho Washington Water Collaborative, and that's another way that we're working together with other purveyors in the area.
I got a question here about the class action lawsuits. It's a big subject. The way I understand it is across the country, more than 4,000 local class action lawsuits around PFAS have been consolidated into a single federal court in South Carolina. So they call the bellwether process that of those several thousand, the court picks out a few to dig deeply in, and then the decisions and the models around those few cases form the pattern for the resolution of PFAS class action suits around the country. So eventually all of those lawsuits from Washington, both Eastern and Western, there are nearly 50 of those class action suits, will come back to a federal courtroom here for disposition by a federal judge in Spokane. So the first class action lawsuit was about 150 people in 2018, and there are now more than 700 individuals that I know of that are part of class action suits around PFAS in this neighborhood. The coalition can only do about that much because we're not in the litigation business. We're just pointing people towards information. Again, westplainswater.org is the place to look. And anybody who wants to enroll in a class action suit, it's not too late. Marlene mentioned that the city of Spokane has sued the manufacturers. It's interesting to note that the law firm that's representing the city and representing the state of Washington is Rob Ballott's law firm in Cincinnati. So if you remember him from the Dark Waters movie or from the book Exposure, that's the guy who's pulling for us here in Spokane. And I think that's a neat connection between us. Marlene, whatever choice was made for that firm, I have confidence that there's nobody better to talk about PFAS on our behalf than that particular firm.
Feshchalu, Louise Quest, Margot Hill Ferguson. I'm a Spokane tribal citizen, urban planning professor, and former attorney for the Spokane Tribe of Indians. Our tribe, along with we had a team of lawyers with Mary Werner and Dave Lundgren that worked really hard to set or to apply for treatment as a state under the Clean Water Act. The Spokane tribe has amazing scientists that set the water quality standards very high for the Spokane River, and that benefits us all. A couple issues. I understood that there was state dollars available to study this problem in Airway Heights, and we actually had county politicians and representatives that did not support those efforts. That's very concerning. I appreciate each and every one of you and all the work that you do. The city of Spokane, all the investments that we've invested to protect the Spokane River from CSO tanks. I've worked alongside the river keepers. my concern is the sustainability of selling water out under the current water law situation of the Hearst decision of 2016. We keep exempting domestic water wells in the watersheds. I don't know that we can sustain it. Department of Ecology, I don't know if we don't have the resources, but if you continually people are drying out and we're selling from the Spokane River. My daughter lives in Airway Heights, so I appreciate that we provide clean, healthy water supply. But I'm concerned about the sustainability of that with climate change and the snowpack. In our language, we say "het mok mok, smet klon wet" for the snow on the mountaintops that in the spring becomes our river. It's a serious concern, and I appreciate everyone that's come out tonight to collectively work on this issue. When this president was in the previous administration, the river keepers flew me over to Seattle, the EPA, because they wanted to lower the water quality the background water quality standards down at that point. So I appreciate your work, but again, my question goes to the sustainability, the ability of the city of Spokane to continue to pipe out water. How long can we do that under these conditions when not everybody is in for conservation? We're watering our lawns and we have to force people into conservation. How long can we prolong this?
Good evening, and thanks to everybody in this room and beyond. A couple questions. I think this first one is for Dr. Pritchard, having to do with are the samples that have been taken, and maybe even also for ecology, our friends at ecology, the samples that have been taken. Have there been samples taken at the point where the paleo channels meet the Spokane River, basically? Can we see that there is an extra, more or less concentration of PFAS where the paleo channels then contribute to the flow in the river?
We've gotten fairly close. I use what the existing wells that we have. The $400,000 would barely drill 2 wells maybe at most, and then we wouldn't be able to sample anything. So we have existing wells, and unfortunately that well was for the state of Washington, and it was closed down as a drinking water well because it came out in the hundreds of parts per trillion in 7 mile.
And which paleo, whereabouts roughly is the well?
Where the hot spot was on my map, for the most part, there's a red zone right before you got to the Spokane River. So it's not like right on the Spokane River. Another thing too is we use existing wells because if I had a pump to pump the water out, I'd have to get a brand new one for each well because PFAS is in pumps and Teflon and all the piping. So by using existing drinking water wells, I don't cross-contaminate, or we don't cross-contaminate.
So I guess I couldn't see which of the 5 paleo channels is this well and these results?
Airway Heights Paleo Channel comes out at 7 mile, and that's right below the 9 mile, and that's probably the biggest discharge from both airports. It's PFAS and PFH excess, the highest.
Okay.
There.
So, and that very well. My second question has to do with this well that's been proposed to replace the Airway Heights municipal wells, that it is generally in that general area and has that proposed location for the Airway Heights replacement well. Has that been the report that investigated the possibilities of that, has that been updated to include PFAS? Because the report I got a couple of years ago from Airway Heights didn't talk PFAS at all.
So the proposed Airway Heights well, and we have wonderful city council members from City Airway Heights here, is going to be right next to Fairchild Air Force Base. They have 2 wells over by Bowl and Pitcher, and those are drilled down. I mean, so they're not quite the cool handheld or the hand dug wells. They're down farther. And so they're in the Grand Ronde Aquifer, and they should be fairly clean. I mean, they should be clean. Yeah.
Is it intended to use those wells to replace the Airway Heights water?
My understanding that I have is that it would be very nearby, and they would use when they put new pipes down, they would just add the extra pipe at the time because Fairchild needs to relay their pipes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
And then I don't know about sustainability and all that stuff, but there was a point about Idaho as well. The Department of Equality or the Department of Environmental Quality in Idaho actually goes out and samples hundreds of wells every summer. That's something we don't necessarily do. So I know everybody said $15 for an APA. No, but that money is great because that's how we monitor the Spokane Valley Rouch and Prairie Aquifer. And if we don't pass that APA, it's not going to get monitored by anybody. Just so please vote yes for an APA, and with the West Plains as well too. Yeah.
That's my third question or comment. Thank you.
Say something about that.
The Aquifer Protection Area ballot issue, which would be another 20-year extension of the first 20 years. So this would be year 41 to 60. Protecting the Spokane Valley Raft and Prairie Aquifer. This proposed ballot absolutely excludes the West Plains, despite our many, many efforts and appearances in front of the commission, the city council. Please include the West Plains. The West Plains provides numerous critical services and endures impacts from those services. We have landfills, we've got garbage haulage and incineration, we've got casinos and prisons and retired landfills and open landfills, but we are being absolutely excluded with no explanation. So everyone's invited to come out and talk to the county commissioners tomorrow at 2:00 and a week hence, 2:00.
Yes, please do.
Thank you.
Last question.
I don't need a microphone.
Yes, step up. Be on the camera, please, Hank.
I'm Hank Beinecker, and I'm a resident of Airway Heights and a city councilman there. And you're right, Marlene, we have a longstanding agreement with the city. When I turn the spigot on, just to be clear, how many parts per trillion of PFAS is coming out of that spigot? 0 or 2 to 4?
I guess I can't tell you that number. This time of year, it's probably 0. The wells that we have had detections on at 2 and 4 are primarily summer production wells, not winter production wells. And the results have varied from non-detect to, around 4, and nobody gets water from one well. So it all gets, you send the water to the tank, it gets mixed around with water from other tanks, and then we send it through the distribution system out. So transmission, then distribution. So less than 4. So somewhere between, so it would be difficult for us to say, right?
We're not in court, by the way, I'm not going to.
I don't know, right? So because no one's water comes from a single source in the city, and the results have varied from quarter to quarter. So I don't know that I know enough to be able to tell you specifically what you're getting. But when we follow the rules as laid out by EPA, we are under the action level currently. But we got to know more, right?
I just want to understand, how would I field the question if John said, hey, how much PFAS is coming out of that sink of yours for city water? I'd like to have at least an idea of what to tell them,
Well, it could be 0, or it could be something a little bit north of 0.
Okay.
But it's not what the citizens were being exposed to prior to switching the water source, right? I mean, we're talking about magnitudes of contamination. I mean, huge magnitudes. The numbers that we were getting in Airway Heights were 1,500 parts per trillion, 1,700 parts per trillion, right? And the action level at that, or the proposed action level at that time, was 70, right? So much, much higher than what we're seeing, fortunately. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be vigilant and we shouldn't be looking what else we can do, right? So, I mean, I think that's where we're at, right? And when we talk about the multi-district litigation, it's just on the drinking water side right now. Those things will happen around the clean water side as well, the sewer side, the stormwater side, and those kinds of things too. So this is all relatively new, even though this stuff has been around for a really long time, right? So the science is just catching up, and the testing technology is just catching up.
Thank you for your answer. A number of years ago, there was a study done on, I think, 25 major cities across the United States, but they weren't testing for PFAS. So I'm curious to know if the city of Spokane has ever tested for pharmaceuticals, because out of that study, Philadelphia scored the highest with 53 different pharmaceuticals. I mean, all kinds of things under the sun that treat illness, disease, all that sort of thing. 53 were found in the tap water in Philadelphia. And I'm wondering, have you guys ever done any of that type of testing? I know you can't test for everything.
Yeah, I'm not sure what kind of pharmaceuticals we're testing for. A lot of what we're testing for, like I said, is a lot of bacteria, viruses. You know, we test for cryptosporidium and giardia, and we test for arsenic, and we test for metals, and we test for, so I'm not sure how much pharmaceutical testing we've done. We do a lot of PCB testing. Obviously, Spokane has led the way in terms of understanding PCBs. So, there's a lot of things, but yes, there's always something new that we need to be testing for. And pharmaceuticals, hormones are going to be a big deal at some point, right? And a lot of that's just coming right through people as they take their medications and their hormones and things like that. So, and we don't know yet what the membrane filters do for those kinds of compounds. So, there's 6
ppd.
There's that coming up. There's always new contaminants of concern that we need to look for on both sides of the house. So the drinking water side, but also what's coming through the wastewater treatment side.
One last thing, John, sorry. This gentleman was talking about, the exposure of PFAS and what else is kind of up and coming for exposure. Did you read where 2 citizens in California filed a class action lawsuit against Apple for the rubber bands on their Apple Watches have high concentrations, evidently, of PFAS. So they've got this class action lawsuit now on some of the sport bands on your. So for those of you who aren't wearing metal ones or something like that, or leather, probably, maybe you want to take a look at swapping out your band.
I think as it's clear, it's a really complicated subject. I'd like to say a big thanks to these 4 experts who've come tonight. So stay tuned for upcoming events by the coalition. Chad is doing a whole night on June the 9th at the Hub. And then in September, we're doing a whole evening of PFAS in your outdoor gear with a visiting blogger from Denver who's coming to talk about raincoats and sleeping bags and all that. And then in November, I think on the 17th, is a whole night about PFAS in agriculture, including the biosolids, which Marlene touched on tonight. So the hits keep rolling here with the coalition. westplainswater.org is the place to get upcoming events, educational materials. If you sign up as a member, we'll send something to your email inbox just about every week. We're always needing more volunteers, more donors to keep this work going. Tell a story to someone you know. You'll also find a recording of this evening on our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to review any of this or pass it along to people you know, it's not hard to do that on the YouTube channel at westplainswater.org. I'd like to say thanks to everybody who's helped tonight. Thank you. And this said, should wells be tested every 2 years? Will Washington Ecology pay for testing? We know from both Chad's data and from the Fairchild report that there are wells that fluctuate a lot from wet weather to dry weather. There are some wells that Fairchild is still testing quarterly because there's such variety. Other wells are just steady and don't seem to be requiring a lot of testing. But it's an uncertain world of what's under the ground. It's not just invisible under the ground, it's parts per trillion. So we shouldn't take anything for granted, either the worry or the optimism, but we have to keep working it. and let's keep working it together. Thank you all for coming tonight and for your part of storytelling about PFAS in our community. Thank you very much.